Coming to you live from a repurposed bedroom in the suburbs of Cincinnati, this is the Atheist Manifesto. Hello and welcome to the Atheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined by my co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
I just spent the whole weekend judging a thing that I don't know anything about, which is fun.
I thought I
did, but then it turned out that I didn't.
So you're the average American voter.
Bum, bum.
Timely humor, right?
There's a debate competition happening at Illinois State University in town, and they needed some judges who don't have any particular experience judging debates, so I volunteered and also got paid, which is great.
Nice.
And I learned very quickly that these are not the kind of debates that I'm used to listening to, that probably most of us are used to listening to. You know, where the person comes up and has their 10 minutes where they give their spiel, and the other person has their 10 minutes, and then they have a nice friendly back and forth. These people are talking so fast. It is unbelievable. I could barely make out what most of them were saying. So that was fun, trying to judge them based on things that I couldn't understand what they were saying. Some of them were cool and were like, oh, do you have any debate experience? And I said no, and they said, okay, well, we'll slow down for you. So those people were cool. But other people were just like, blah, 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 blah. Let's cram as much information as we can into my little 6-minute opening. And then the other person can't debate back because they don't even know what I said.
Right, but you got paid for it, so that means that you're a professional debate judge now.
It is, yes. I'm officially a professional at things.
Awesome. Well, this is going to be a cool episode. I'm really excited about this discussion. Our guest is Karen Garst. Karen is the author of a book called Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. Karen, welcome to the Atheist Manifesto.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So why don't you just start off, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Okay. Well, let's see. I was born in North Dakota.
I love that. I was born in a small town.
I was raised as a Lutheran. This was back in the 50s, and I knew everybody what church they went to. There were like 5 Jewish families. There was a Catholic school, and everyone else was Protestant. So, I mean, everybody knew everybody. Let's see. I went to college. I went to grad school. We'll talk a little bit about some of the religion courses I had. I was in Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. I went to Lutheran College there in Minnesota, too. And probably became an atheist a couple decades ago. And when my husband and I left the church that we were going to, we never sought out any secular community. We just slept in on Sundays and raised our son secular. And it wasn't until 2014 when the United States Supreme Court issued its decision in Hobby Lobby, Burwell v. Hobby Lobby, where they decided that this craft store, because of its religious views, didn't have to provide certain forms of birth control under the Affordable Care Act to its employees, that I got active. And I was having lunch with a friend of mine who's an author and said, you should write a book. And I said, well, the only thing I can get upset about is religion. So I, early on, I was
a short path from one to the other, right?
I was introduced to Dr. Peter Boghossian, who wrote a manual for creating atheists, and he's the author of the new app called Atheos. And he pointed me in the right direction, and the rest is history. I started out recruiting friends, and then I started to join various secular groups and got other people who were interested in writing, and then I reached out through social media. So the 22 women who write their personal journeys of living religion they're a variety in age, background, etc.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the book, because I think it's really cool, because it's not just the perspective of one person and one person's journey. It's actually a collection of stories, and some of them are short, some of them are a little bit long, some are more analytical, some are intensely personal, and I think it's a really cool. I mean, obviously, 22 people isn't going to give you the entire picture, but I just thought it was cool, because normally when you read a book, you're getting one person's perspective, and in this, it's a whole group of people who come from very diverse backgrounds. So that was something that it was really cool to read all the sorts of different points of view.
Well, and the nice thing is about an anthology, you read one and you're really into it, and the next one you're not, you skip it and go to the next one.
So, one of the things that kind of struck me right off reading the book was that, in the top, you mentioned that some of the authors of those essays have to be anonymous out of fear still, like in 2016. Yeah. Like that's a thing that people have to do to protect their identities when they're talking about their exit from religion. So I think that's sort of a stark reminder, because I think a lot of us, especially, even someone like me, like I have issues with being trans and stuff like that, but like where I live, being atheist is not a big deal. Like the worst I get is like a sideways glance from somebody, in most cases. But there are still people in this country too. It's not just in, some far off place where, atheism is illegal. There are still people in this country today who don't feel safe outing themselves as atheist. Well, and one of the authors, she's obviously under a pseudonym. Her name is Seal, and she belonged to a Jehovah's Witness denomination, and if they knew that she was an atheist, it's called disfellowshipped. But it's not just her who's disfellowshipped. The rest of the people who are still participating in that church or that religion would be outlawed from ever having anything to do with her again. So while including immediate family, extended family, like basically your entire social structure.
Exactly. And while her immediate family knows, her extended family doesn't. So cousins and things like that, because it's a large family, they can still be with her. Now, I don't know if any of them say, gee, I haven't seen you in church lately, or something like that, but she may not live close to them. And I think the thing about religion, it is such a big social structure. One of the authors, Marcia Abelman, when she and her husband left, they were living in Colorado Springs, and they were part of a large, I believe it was Church of Christ, congregation. And when they left, they had all these friends and everything. None of them had anything to do with them. They never went out to dinner. They never went out to drinks. They never had anything to do with those people again. So I think there's a lot of people sitting in those pews who are probably atheists, but they just don't want to give up their friends.
Right, and that's understandable. Like, it's really sad that that's a thing people have to do. I think all of us are familiar with that to some degree. When before I came out and I'm sitting with my grandma, and my grandma is saying, awful things about queer people or about trans people, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, I really hope that you would feel differently if you realized you were talking about me, but I don't know that I can trust that you would. So, like, I can't tell you who I am. And that's such an awful place to be.
That's something that struck me as you mentioned Seal's essay, and that was one of the essays that stuck out to me in this collection. She mentioned how she wasn't allowed to be around certain people, to associate with certain people, and she was told that those people were evil and scary and weren't godly. And it wasn't until she did start to get to know some of these people that she realized that they were just people, which was a big contributor to her falling away from being a Jehovah's Witness. And that's something that we talk about a lot on this show. We really want to expose people to other sorts of people that they might not know in their daily lives, like queer people or trans people or even atheists, if there's like queer people who listen to this show who aren't atheists. So I thought that was really important that she brought that up, that her religious background was so bent on keeping her away from all these other people and telling her that they were different and they were wrong. And when she realized that they weren't, that whole thing started to come apart for her.
Exactly. And I think, what's real interesting to me, my brother moved out to Oregon. He's now passed away, but he moved out shortly after I did. And, he had a habit sometimes of saying not nice things about gay people. And he met a friend of mine who was gay. And he really liked him. We all got along. And he never said anything against gay people again. Once he met somebody and could identify, oh, this nice person, Craig, is gay, therefore, gee, I'm not going to say anything again. And that's the same thing with atheism. We have to come out and tell people, and they'll go, oh, well, she's normal. She's an atheist. She still has morals. She's not going to go kill somebody and rob the store. Oh, I guess, atheists have morals.
Something else that really struck me in the essay by Ann Wilcox.
Yeah, this is my favorite one.
There's a line where she says she calls it the morning she knew. And, one of the things that I actually say in my talks a lot is that people don't have this journey overnight. Like, you don't go to bed a fundamentalist Christian and wake up an atheist. It starts with doubting, and it starts with questioning and struggling. And then, eventually you get to the point where it's like, wow, I guess I'm an atheist now. And obviously that's not the way it is for everyone, but I think it's probably safe to say that for most people, it's a very long journey. And like, when you get deeper into the essay, it does seem like there was a little bit of that going on, but it was interesting to me that she spoke of it being sort of a lightning bolt kind of moment, because I don't think that's super common.
Well, and I think the thing about Anne's essay, who's also, it's a pseudonym because her mother doesn't know and her mother's still alive.
Right.
But she really struggled, even after saying, you have a lightning bolt and you say, I don't believe anymore. But there were so many influences of that religion, and particularly guilt and shame, that she processed that for years. In fact, she sent me an email a few months ago, right before the book came out, and said, I went to the Oregon coast, I sat down, and I think I felt serene for the first time in my life. And I think writing the essay really helped.
Wow.
So just, the process of going through that and analyzing it. And one of the things she says in her essay is she wrote a lot. I mean, in order to process what she was going through, she wrote a lot. I mean, I think she has enough material for a book, and she's a very, very good writer. But can you imagine, like 30 years later, saying, I feel okay about myself?
Yeah, well, I mean, in a way, that's something that I can identify with. I spent, basically 28 years in the closet, and I can definitely identify with, the idea of, having to hide who you are from everyone around you, even like the people that are closest to you and love you the most, and even people who, like, I have zero doubt in my mind that they're going to be 100% behind me and okay and support me and love me, but I'm still terrified to share this part of myself with that person. And then finally you do, and it's just, it's like a 10-ton weight off your chest. And that's, that's one of the things, we talk a lot. The show is about the intersection of atheist and secular and LGBTQ activism. And that's one of the things that I talk about a lot, is sort of the parallel between coming to terms with being an atheist and coming to terms with being queer, being trans. There are so many parallels there. And I think that's probably one of the biggest ones, is just that, like, to one degree or another, I don't have this secret weighing me down anymore.
Well, and I think that's a good example of how culture influences us. I was doing a presentation in Seattle, and I said to the crowd, I said, try to go one day without saying a word that could be related to religion. And I know I couldn't make it because I say, oh my God, all the time, or Jesus Christ, or something.
Right.
But
well, especially on Thursday.
Yeah, it permeates us. Interestingly enough, I did my dissertation. I never went into academia, but I did my dissertation on cultural reproduction. There's a French sociologist of education called Pierre Bourdieu. And because I spoke French, my major advisor wanted me to do that. And we talked about how in the education system, people tried to change things. Oh, it's not good to track kids. Let's not track kids. And they understood it on an intellectual level. And they'd go in the classroom and they'd divide people by the way they talked, what they were wearing, all of those different things unconsciously, that they sorted those people out just as they had done before. So I think our culture permeates who we are. We are a part of our culture.
I agree. And that's, one of the other things that I read that kind of struck me, and I, like a jerk, I forgot to write down which essay this is from. But there's a line where they're talking about hell, and it says, to this day, I sometimes feel like I'm being watched even when there's no one around. And I felt that way because when I finally figured out that I was an atheist, I was like 16, 17, like in full on rebellion mode. So like once I figured out that it didn't make sense to me, I automatically became that annoying firebrand that was like, everybody who's religious is stupid. You're all sheep. I don't feel that way now, and I think that was kind of a jerk way to be. But like even in that sort of firebrand, like I hate everything this is about, I still would sometimes in the back of my head think like, yeah, but what if? And there was still that fear that was baked into me about like, what if I get in a car accident on the way home and this was all real? Even though I was convinced, fully convinced on a rational and an intellectual level that none of it made sense. But that cultural programming was still so powerful that I still wasn't able to get away from like the sort of, Pascal's wager. Like, what if this is true?
Exactly. Well, and I do say, I think religion is the last cultural barrier to gender equality. And I would say gender equality too, in terms of LGBTQ. I think that if you look at some of the backlash you face, that most of the basis for that's in religion.
Oh, 100%.
And if you look at countries that have pay equity, rights for women, they're the least religious countries. Iceland is a leader in pay equity. Guess what? It's the least religious. So there is a distinct correlation there.
Oh yeah, I agree 100% because, a lot of times what I say is that, the problem with religion is not so much that it's wrong because we've all been wrong, right? The problem with religion is that it's dogmatic, that it's not open to changing the way that you think and believe based on new information. And, religion is not necessarily the only manifestation of that. I mean, hardcore nationalism, that kind of stuff, like that's almost sort of a religion unto itself. So like religion is not necessarily the only culprit of that kind of cultural structure. But I do think like if we look back at history and we want to figure out which of those is the most harmful and the most prevalent, I think religion is it hands down.
To live in a world where ignorance rules? Ignorance would have you believe that the world is a terrifying place, ruled by an unknowable and invisible force that demands your love upon pain of eternal torture. Ignorance would have you believe that the sun is a horse-drawn chariot, the earth is flat, and that faith, the evidence of things not seen, is a virtue. Ignorance would have you believe the South is filled only with ignorant rednecks who've never worn shoes, and that it is a dangerous place for the open-minded to visit and live. Ignorance would have you believe a lot of things. Ignorance is wrong. Reason has been working hard to make life better for all Americans and humanity across the globe since before the discovery of fire. Reason wants a better life for you and for your family. Reason helped Ignaz Semmelweis discover in 1847 that hand washing could help prevent the transmission of disease, saving countless lives. In 1944, Reason helped Grace Hopper and Howard Aiken develop the Mark I computer. Reason took us to the moon, gave us all supercomputers in our pockets, and allows amputees to walk again through prosthetic technology. Reason has done all of this and has never accepted a cent in compensation. Reason reaches across the aisles to help those with faith make morally sound judgments and helps us all change our own worldview when new evidence is brought to light. Reason helps us all. Ignorance is wrong for America and wrong for the world. This 2017, make your voice heard by telling ignorance it is totally wrong for you and the world by making Reason your chosen philosophy. And buy your tickets now for ReasonCon 3. Join us and our speakers and champions of reason, Lawrence Krauss, Matt Dillahunty, Aaron Ra, Callie Wright, Jim Craig, and Emily Templewood. Also a whole lot of your favorite podcasters, as well as your new friends, old friends, and those unmet in a celebration of all that is reasonable. Join us in helping to put reason back in the driver's seat of America and the world.
ReasonCon 3 will be held in Hickory, North Carolina on April 21st and 22nd, 2017. Please get your tickets at reasonnc.com. That's reasonnc.com.
I'm Miss B. Haven, and I approve this message.
another thing and this could probably be an entire episode on its own. Lalandra Ra's essay. One of the things that she says is that she's encountered the online discourse surrounding atheist and atheism scaring people away from in real life activism and organizing, because there are some parts of the internet, like the YouTube comment section or the Pathos comment section, that just get so incredibly toxic that, I mean, I've met people who tell me like, oh, you're involved in the atheist movement? Like, isn't that a terrible place? And I'm like, my God, no, like some of the best people I've ever met in my life are involved in this movement. And then they like point to these things that they saw on these Facebook groups or in these YouTube comment sections. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, that's awful stuff. But like, if you get past that and you get to the in real life activism and you get to know some of the podcasters and the people who run groups like Recovering from Religion and Foundation Beyond Belief and Secular Student Alliance and Camp Quest, like they're amazing people who do amazing work.
Hashtag not all
helping
atheists.
Out people and doing good things. Right. Hashtag not all atheists. But I wondered if you could kind of sort of expand on that and sort of give your thoughts on that.
Well, as I said earlier, when my husband and I left this very liberal congregation, we didn't seek out any secular groups. So when I started 2 years ago, I did. Everybody was welcoming. There are several in the greater Portland, Oregon area. And I went to them and I was seeking authors, and I got several women from different organizations to become involved. And they asked me to do my presentation, to speak before the group. And then as I reached out in social media, because a lot of the people that I've contacted, just like the two of you, I haven't met in person. But everybody has been great and helpful. I've been on a lot of podcasts. I've asked people to do a blog, people who are bloggers, to do a post about the book to get a little more exposure. And when I reached out to people to write blurbs, I mean, I have Richard Dawkins, I have Sakivu Hutchinson, I have Valerie Tirico, Peter Boghossian, John Loftus. All of these people would say, yes, absolutely, I'll be happy to help out. And there's really one or two instances I can cite, and I won't, where people weren't. But that was a minuscule amount. And I look like we're in this together. So if I did this long spreadsheet of all these podcasts that I've looked and how to contact them, et cetera, and the names, I'm going to give it to you. And I've shared it with a couple other friends who are authors, who are atheist writers, saying, you don't have to start from scratch. Let me give this to you. And they, in turn have helped. So I think it's the online stuff where people can type anything. In a way, you got to disregard that. I've had... Mostly, I dealt with the word feminist, because when I started my blog, I hired a marketing guy, and his idea was to call it Godless Grandmother, and I said, let's not emphasize how old I am, okay? And he came up with Faithless Feminist, and I'm a second wave feminist. I came of age in the '60s, and I had no idea what happened to that word.
Oh no!
Right?
I was on, I'll have to tell you this story. I was on this, I'm getting back at them by mentioning it every time I have the opportunity. It's called No Gods, No Masters, Atheist Feminists. And Shanna Babylonian and I, who has a blog at MyObi, she and I wrote this blog about we need more secular men. It's not a topic I'd normally write about, but, I was doing it with her and we wrote it. The first thing when I got on there, because I saw I had a message after I posted it to this group, was, she's kidding, right? This is a joke, right? And so I started dialogue with them, and I said, and they basically said, we don't need men. And I said, women's rights movement, the right to vote, we had a lot of support from men. I have a lot of support from my husband and my son. I think we're in this together. And they kicked me off. And I've encountered some of that. I've watched some of the YouTubes with the anti-feminists.
I'm sorry.
And, on the one hand, I want to defend the word feminist. And on the other hand, I want to say, look, I don't care what you call it. I just want the same rights as men. That's it.
Yeah.
And men should have the same rights as women.
And I've run into the same thing. And, it's hard because, I mean, that's that's the right word, right? Feminism, because we know that in the equation that women are the ones who are at the disadvantage. That's why it's called feminism, because we're trying to elevate women to the status of privilege that men have. But when you say that, a lot of times people's ears automatically get closed. So it's, it's hard to know exactly where to draw the line. Do we meet them where they are and speak their language and compromise our message to try to get them to listen? Or do we go in guns blazing and say, no, this is what it is? A lot of times it's hard to know, one, what's effective, because that's really the important thing. And two, like what our priorities are. It's really hard. So yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Ari, did you have, you had a bunch of stuff in your notes, and I
wanted to go back to something that Callie brought up earlier with the subverting expectations when she read about people who had kind of a quick turn on a dime and could pinpoint exactly when they stopped believing in whatever religion they had previously. There were several things in this book that really subverted my expectations about the typical atheist journey or the typical atheist narrative. And one of them, we spent a lot of time arguing against the whole angry at God notion. Like, no, I'm not an atheist because, something terrible happened to me in my childhood, or I'm not an atheist because the church did things wrong to me or because it tore my family apart. I'm just an atheist because I just don't believe in any of the religious claims. And there are several people in this collection who did start to question their faith because of traumatic things that happened to them. There were people who lost loved ones. There were people who were pretty much coerced to stay in abusive relationships because the church told them they needed to do that. There were people who, there was one author who her sister got shipped off to live somewhere else, and she didn't get to see her for many years because her sister had underage premarital sex, and that was forbidden. And it just got me thinking about how we do spend a lot of time trying to kind of fight against that narrative, but I think that narrative is also extremely valid. It probably didn't cause these people to just abandon their faith in one fell swoop, but it definitely did get them started down this path of questioning what they had been taught, because they had been taught that there is this, all-powerful, all-loving deity, and their real-world experience clashed with that, and that caused them to start to be able to see the cracks of their religious dogma.
Exactly. And I think Seal talks about that when she was called before this tribunal, and they basically accused her of her boyfriend being Satan. And she goes, wait a sec. I love him. He's not the devil. And,
because he wasn't the right kind of Christian.
Yeah. And she walks away and goes, that's it. And then she finds out later that one of the elders of the church was having an affair with somebody else. So talk about the pot calling the kettle black, as we say in North Dakota.
Right. Well, it's projecting. It's, what the people who are like the people in relationships who are always accusing the other person of cheating are often doing it themselves, or like trying to throw suspicion off themselves by accusing everyone else and keeping the attention off themselves. I don't know if there's actually like any scientific research to validate that, but anecdotally, it's something that does seem to follow.
Yeah. And Kelly, you were talking earlier about, the influence of religion, and I just wrote an article for Secular Nation, which is the magazine of the Atheist Alliance of America. And I really pondered about the election, why 52% of white women voted for Trump and 94% of black women voted for Hillary. And I was thinking about that. And if you're raised kind of like Ann Wilcox's essay, in a fundamentalist or evangelical household where you're taught God is man, Jesus is man, the Holy Ghost is probably a man, and all of those things about the man being in charge of the family and not being able to talk back, and he's in charge, etc. Could you really press the button for a woman? And I think it would be fascinating if somebody did a psychological study, a kind of a blind study, and had women choose between, woman doctor, male doctor, etc., and see if based on their religion, what they chose. Because I know, even at my age, I will lay my head on the pillow and I'll start to go, now I lay me down to sleep.
Right.
Because it was a prayer I learned when I was a little kid. Some of that never leaves you. It's internal and you don't even know about it. That's the impact of culture. Even after you say, I've left religion, it still may have an influence on you.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that's, one of the things that I learned from listening to Daryl Ray's podcast, the Secular Sexuality podcast. And he talks about people's hangups about sex and even people who are atheist. And his whole thing is leaving religion doesn't necessarily mean you leave religion's cultural influence. So you can still have all of these ideas. And he was talking about it in the context of sex, but I think it applies across the board. And I mean, I find myself doing that sometimes when, internalized transphobia, internalized queerphobia, internalized misogyny, those thoughts that I have that are sort of offhand, like knee-jerk reactions that you think like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. Why am I thinking that? And then, so it's like the meme that floats around Facebook, that's like, the first thing that you think is your cultural programming. The second thing that you think is who you actually are. And it's really sad that cultural programming isn't, your cultural programming isn't to critically analyze and critically think. Your cultural programming is to automatically judge and have a knee-jerk reaction. And I think that's a bit evolutionary, right? Because for most of our history, we had to be able to make snap decisions about important things, or else we were going to get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger,
Specifically, the saber-toothed tiger, nothing else. Just that one. Right. Man's greatest enemy.
Right. But I mean, it's terrible. I mean, I find myself thinking problematic things about myself and about other people that I know they don't come from who I am as a person. They come from the culture that I grew up in. And it's so massive. And it's like, I mean, how do we beat that? Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, how do we beat that?
Well, you don't get a blank slate and start over again. You may decide at any point in your life, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in God, but you can't go back to the beginning. You can't go back to the beginning and erase all the impact it has on you. And I know Daryl Ray, I've read his book. I think sex, what we learn about sex because of religion is probably the most perverse aspect of religion.
Oh, yeah.
I grew up not knowing anything about sex. I saw the movie in 5th grade and found out that it was Walt Disney who did it with Kotex, and all the girls got to go in.
Right. And
I came home and, of course, it was so obtuse. I didn't understand it at all. And I yelled at the top of my voice, Mom, what's menstruation mean? And then she sat down and drew the female body and explained it to me. And of course, I never said the word out loud again, right?
Right.
But she never told me how that female body was going to work with a male body. And in junior high, I took one of my sister's books, and it was called 79 Park Avenue, written by Harold Robbins, and I took it and read it in my bed at night. And a shop owner raped a young girl. That's how I figured out what intercourse was. And it was so bad that the kids in junior high were talking about whores. And I said, no, it's pronounced whore. It's W-H-O-R-E.
Oh, God.
So I had this totally academic.
Right.
So that's how I learned about sex, through rape. What a way to teach a child, or for me to learn as a child. That's what sex was. That's how I figured it out.
Yeah, well, and there's a story that I tell all the time, and it was literally actually reading this book that made me think of this story in a different way. I had a friend that it was just after high school. She was a couple years younger than me. We met at a job that we worked at together, and we got really close for a while. And she was like, she grew up doing youth group and was like super innocent. And I've never really been that kind of innocent. And I just thought like, oh, that's cute, sweet, innocent. And I don't want to say her name on air. But she was telling me a story about a date that she went on. And she went out on a date with this guy, and he's just like going on and on and on about his foot fetish. And she has literally not the first clue what that means.
Yeah.
And so she goes home, Mom, what's a foot fetish? And Mom's like, gosh, I have no idea. Let's look it up.
Oh, no.
And so they Google foot fetish, and that's how they figure these things out. And I'm just thinking like, so this is, at the time, a 20-year-old girl, and her mom, who is, I'm sure, at the least 20 or 30 years older than her, that are 100% like not educated on this stuff. And like, not that everyone needs to know everything about fetishes, but it's just, it was something that like I told as like this, oh, this is a really funny story. This is like sweet, innocent person finding out about this like fetish thing and like, oh, this is really funny. But actually after reading this book and like more, thinking about that, I was like, wow, that's really sad that there was just no awareness of anything like that. And that's, again, that's religion. She grew up in a Christian house and going to youth group, and like, she wanted to get married young so she could have sex, like those kinds of attitudes. And it's like, and I just think to myself, I mean, how much pain and trauma and hurt has happened to people that, I mean, it's not necessary.
Well, I had a friend in junior high, a girlfriend, and her mother had given her a book, at least. She didn't talk to her, but she gave her this book about sex, right? And I was at her house once, and she said, I came across this word, and I can't figure out what it means. And the word is masturbation. And so we got out the dictionary. This is before Google, right? We got out the dictionary and read the definition and still couldn't figure out what it meant.
Wow.
The definition was so obtuse, we didn't know what it meant.
Yeah, that's what I was taught first in sex ed. They said masturbation was touching yourself. And I was like, I touch myself all the time. What's wrong with that? I don't understand what this is. And it wasn't until years and years later that I realized that I had been doing that since I was 5 years old. And I had no idea that thing that I was doing was masturbation. I thought masturbation was something completely different.
Oh, that's a hoot.
Yeah. Well,
that's a great story.
And this was at a secular school, too.
And it's so unnatural. I mean, here is a totally natural process that should be talked about just like getting a cold, and it's not at all. And I kind of, my parents, I know because they told me, were both virgins when they got married. And there were some issues that came up with that. So they already went through not knowing. And then, the nuptial night, wouldn't they want to teach their children so their children didn't have to go through it? And my brother got his girlfriend pregnant and had to get married when he was 19. And I will never forget, I walked upstairs because he was in my dad's room with the door closed, and I walked upstairs, my older sister, and I said, I didn't think she was that kind of a girl. Whoa. And my older sister said, what do you mean she's that kind of girl? So I had this really warped knowledge or lack of knowledge about sexual relationships. And what does that prepare you for? Nothing. It prepares you for, and people who don't have sex education, they have sex just as often as people who have sex education. So we might as well educate people. But it's just, and it's trauma to, go in a situation and you don't know anything that's going on. I mean, it's embarrassing.
There was one story, I didn't write down the author's name, but it was a woman who grew up in England, and it talked about how her teenage sister got caught kissing a boy, and because of that, they had to move towns. It was unbelievable to me that these children would have to go through such a huge upheaval just because this teenage sister did the most natural thing in the world and kissed a boy that she found attractive.
Well, in that one essay you were talking about earlier, where it was Michelle and her sister had sex with a bishop's son, and the grandmother kind of had custody of the kids for some insurance reasons, and the grandmother was, a real high-ranking person in the church, or she was very active, and so they sent her sister away, but they didn't do anything to the bishop's son. And so it's not just sex, but it's that whole thing about women. And, I think back, if St. Augustine, Tertullian, all of those people never would have existed, but they took that story in Genesis and made it into original sin. Original sin is caused by carnal lust, and carnal lust is the fault of women. And what that has done over the last 2,000 years to shame women and make them guilty and feel shame is just incredible.
That was another thing that was brought up in several different of these essays. There were people who attended religious colleges, and they said they were completely double standards for the men and women. For example, the women had a curfew and they had to live in a house. They couldn't live in like an apartment or a dorm, whereas the men could pretty much just do whatever they wanted. It was the women who were on lockdown all the time, and how they felt that was really unfair. Like, why is this all on us? I understand that we're not supposed to be having sex, because at the time they mostly believed that, but why is it that it's our responsibility and we're the ones who are getting restrictions put on us, and when the men do anything, it's just boys will be boys?
Well, and that was my essay, and it was at Concordia College, and the Dean of Women explained it by saying, well, if we've got you in the dorms locked up, then the men, it's okay, because they won't have anywhere to go. But the thing about the apartment was we had to live, if you weren't living in a dorm, you had to live in an apartment in somebody's house. And the boys got to go to an apartment with dishwashers and, really nice places. We couldn't rent a place like that. We had to be in this kind of supervised, quasi-supervised housing. And it was totally a double standard.
Hey, all you listeners, I'm Robert.
And I'm Amy from Secular Yakking.
And we just wanted to let you know that if you've got 30 minutes to kill,
then we're the podcast for you. We're just some old married couple who's been yakking at each other over the many years.
And we thought we should start making it so you can listen in on our yakking.
We dig past the mainstream and bring you the news that you may or may not have heard about.
We take a look at politics, religion, science, and pretty much anything we feel like yakking about and sharing it with you. And let us not forget our weekly Mr. Potter Award.
Now, we're not professionals on anything we talk about, but we love to yak about stuff and give you our opinion on the matter.
So tune in at secularyakking.com or check out our feed on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and anywhere good podcasts can be heard.
And who knows what craziness will happen.
Yeah, just like this.
Hi, this is Trav Mamone, host of the By Any Means podcast. Join me every week as I interview bloggers, podcasters, writers, and activists about the intersections of atheism, humanism, racial justice, feminism, LGBTQ rights, and other social issues. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, Spreaker, and Stitcher, and you can read my blog at freethoughtblogs.com/byanymeans. And remember, that's bi spelled B-I. Come take a listen to the musings of a queer humanist, because, hey, aren't we all a little bi-curious?
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Big shout out this week to Johns. Thank you so much for contributing to the show financially and for believing in us enough to support our mission to smuggle penises into women's restrooms and to force every American into their very own mandatory gay marriage. To find out more, head over to patreon.com/thegaytheist manifesto. Thank you. Yeah, and going back to the episode where it was Michelle that she had to, her sister had to leave because that was like, there were a lot of essays in there that kind of got me emotional, which is like, if you know me, that's not a surprising thing. I get emotional really easy, but like that, and it was one of the shorter ones, if memory serves. And I mean, it's one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever read in my life. And it's terrible. And I mean, in addition to just how heartbreaking the story is, she's an incredible writer. And it's so visceral and so real. Like I actually, like, at reading that story, I felt like I was her, like, in that position. Yeah. And I mean, I actually, I read a lot of this book while I was at work, like during downtime at work. And I was actually like, I was kind of looking around like, is anybody looking at me while I'm wiping tears from my eyes? Like, and I think that's like, I mean, there are lots of really sad things that happen as a result of this, and things that make you angry. But I think the breaking up of families is one of the worst things, because it's like you have people who, like, the way that she talks about her relationship with her sister as like her best friend, the person in life that understood her the most, that she was like the most happy and the most herself around, and all of a sudden she's just not in your life anymore because of something as innocuous as having sex with someone. It's just, oh my God, I'm like shaking. I'm angry just like talking about it now.
Well, and I think it's interesting. Michelle is a very good writer, and I think she's going to pursue more writing. But she really talks about that car ride. I mean, some of the authors talk about their entire, upbringing, et cetera, and she focuses on this one car ride, and she gets so much out of that one car ride. And everything she's feeling and everything she's thinking, it's really amazing, and it is incredibly moving.
Yeah, I just,
feelings,
right? Feelings. I know, Ari, you're a big fan of feelings. We're getting close to time here. Ari, was there anything else in particular that you wanted to bring up to discuss?
One thing that I thought was really cool, especially in our context as people that talk about atheism and about LGBT issues for money and also funsies, is that a lot of people were very open about that it was other people that pretty much actively changed their mind, that it was through reading books and talking to their religious leaders and their family and their partners, and especially teachers and professors were a big influence on a lot of people. That was how they were able to first start questioning, and in many cases totally to leave their religious faith behind. And it was really heartening to me to see that all this talking isn't fruitless. Like, this is actually changing people's minds. And if it wasn't for those professors and those authors and those people in their lives, they still might be in that religious context where they might be miserable. So it was really important to me to see that they were able to have their minds changed, and that these kind of conversations are important and do have an impact on people.
Well, and I think now with all the opportunities, and I really appreciate what the two of you do to create this dialogue and have people on and talk about it, because somebody can have their earbuds in their ears and nobody knows what they're doing, and they can listen to it, and they can do it on walks, or they can do it and it's anonymous, yet they can hear and they can learn. And that's a huge opportunity. And I know a lot of people are listening to podcasts because of that. I did want to mention a couple of things, if I might.
Yeah, please do.
People who are interested, I do have a blog, and it's www.faithlessfeminist.com. And I write about all aspects of religion, different historical issues, etc. And I am starting on my second book. And instead of being personal stories, it's going to examine the impact of religion. It's on women, but it's also going to be an ex-Muslim. There's going to be a Latina who's going to talk about her culture and how it impacts them, and somebody who's an African American, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the people I've secured to write is Kaylee Whalen. Do you know her?
I don't. I feel like I've heard the name, but I'm not sure I know who.
She's transgender, and she is one of the media people for the National LGBTQ Task Force. And I met her.
Awesome.
She was on a panel at a Women in Secularism 4 conference, and she's already given me her outline, and she's excited about doing it, particularly after the election. And right. I think that's going to be a really good viewpoint, and it will help educate people a lot. So I wanted to be sure to share that with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Definitely get a hold of me. When it's coming time, close to time for the book to come out. Love to have you back on the show to talk about it more. The thing that I appreciate about this book is, people who listen to the show will notice that we don't focus our conversation on religion so much. It's always sort of religion in the context of social justice or feminism or LGBTQ rights and that kind of thing. And, I've kind of gotten to the point where, like, just arguing back and forth about religion is something that just doesn't hold my interest. It's something that's very important to do. I don't want to downplay the importance of those things, but it's not something that I feel like I have something unique to add to. There are podcasts who do the discussion focus solely on religion. They do it better than I ever could, and I'm thankful that they exist. And that's sort of just a conversation that I don't have very often, because, arguing about, the burden of proof and logical fallacies and all that kind of stuff, I know all of that stuff, but that's just not the conversation that I'm interested in having. And so to sort of refocus the things on, the focus is religion, but it's in the context of personal stories and religion's impact on people's lives and people's journeys. That's really what we're about here, I think, is giving people a platform to tell their stories, so people can share their life experiences, so people can learn and people can be better, and people can, reach out and learn to love on people. So that was, I think if I had to pick one sort of overarching thing that I would say, is that I love this book specifically for that reason, that it gets past the sort of, biblical inerrancy and, what is the Holy Trinity and that kind of stuff. And just this is religion, and this is the impact that it's had on my personal life and the things that I've gone through in life. And that's really, kind of what I'm about. So I appreciate the book, and I definitely appreciate you taking the time to be on the show.
Yeah. And I think we all need models. When I was growing up, I had this science class in 9th grade in evolution, and I wrote a paper about Australopithecus and all these early hominids. And, if I would have had a science teacher who was a woman, or had heard about a woman anthropologist or a paleontologist, it's not like my parents would have stood in the way. It never occurred to me that I could go into that. And so one of the things this book does is give people models. If you think you can't leave religion, read one of these. If they can do it, you can do it. You might have it harder, you might have it easier, but at least it gives you examples of people who've done it. And I think that's really important for us. And I know that's what you're doing in the other arenas as well.
Well, yeah, and equally as important, not just that other people have done it so you can too, but if this is a thing you're going to do, you have a community. You have a safety net to fall into, even if you lose everything else, there's an entire community of people out here who are ready to catch you and embrace you and love you. And, that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. That doesn't mean it's not difficult, but it's a thing that can be done. People have done it successfully and have lived happily after the fact. So it's a thing that can be done. And I think that's a super important message to put out there. So thank you for doing that. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. Definitely want to, again, thank Karen for her time. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCallie, and you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheist. And I'm sure Ari has some silly thing that they're about to do.
Firstly, I will address the affirmative's assertion that any Pokemon after Togepi are in fact real and valid Pokemon. Earlier news constructive, the affirmative cited prominent scholar, atheist, and skeptical whiz kid Ari Stillman, who in fact themselves do not acknowledge the existence of aforementioned Pokemon. See Ari Stillman's Facebook post dated 11:12 p.m. January 30th, 1988. Furthermore, the affirmations claim that I did not establish a clear disad is easily countered by his correspondence from aristillman4@gmail.com, in which Stillman roundly condemned the plan of the affirmative by establishing that it would almost certainly lead to the discovery and distribution of an alien virus from which the worldwide community would never recover. Finally, I will point out the affirmation cited no evidence to conclude the SJW circle jerk on iTunes and Spreaker would in fact lead to nuclear war and thus planetary extinction as posited in Card 2 of the 1AR. The affirmation has no case, and that is why your only valid option is to vote negation on this matter.
That was really impressive, Ari. That was legitimately, seriously impressive. Nicely done.
I'm bowing. You can't see it because it's a podcast, but I'm bowing.
If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can go to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto and make a per episode donation to support the show. And if that's not something that's doable, you can always go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. That helps us get heard by a wider audience. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.